Look at her. Lauren Kang's voice sliced through the crystalline air of the estate's grand hall. The porcelain contrast is offensive. You would think someone hired by his estate would have the grace not to stain the room with her presence. The boss's wife circled Jasmine Jackson with the predatory elegance of someone who'd never faced consequences. Her crimson silk hanbok whispered against marble floors as 5 men in tailored black suits closed ranks around the new maid. Their laughter came sharp and cold, like ice cracking over deep water. Minho, Kang's lead enforcer, stepped forward. His hand moved with deliberate casualness, tipping his half-full glass of Macallan 25. The amber liquid arced through the air, splattering across the spotless marble inches from Jasmine's sensible black shoes. "Pick it up," he commanded, his English thick with contempt. "And look sharp. We don't tolerate clumsy help in this house." The glass rolled, its contents spreading in a golden pool that reflected the chandelier's light. Lauren's phone appeared, already recording. "This is perfect," she murmured to the men. "Daniel will love this. Show him how we maintain standards." Jasmine stood motionless in her crisp black and white uniform, hands clasped at her waist. 24 years old, honors graduate, former intelligence analyst, now a maid by necessity, not choice. The men saw subservience. They didn't see the woman who spoke 5 languages and knew how to kill in all of them. One man, Ji-hoon, she'd already memorized their faces and dossiers from the briefing packet, mimicked her posture mockingly. The others roared. Lauren clapped like he performed a trick. But across the hall, leaning against the doorframe to his private study, Kang Daniel didn't laugh. The boss's eyes were obsidian, unreadable, dissecting her reaction with surgical precision. Searching for the tremor of defiance that would confirm what everyone else believed, that she was breakable. Jasmine's face remained a disciplined blank. No tears. No trembling. She simply bent at the waist, retrieving a cloth from her apron pocket, and began to clean. None of them understood they had just humiliated the one woman capable of identifying the traitor in their midst. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The Kang estate sprawled across 12 acres of prime Seoul suburban real estate, a fortress disguised as elegance. 3-story traditional Hanok architecture blended seamlessly with modern security infrastructure, bulletproof windows masked as traditional hanji paper, pressure sensors beneath every stone in the courtyard garden, facial recognition cameras hidden in the eaves. Jasmine Morton had arrived at dawn, her single suitcase containing everything she owned. The job posting had been specific, live-in domestic staff. 3-year contract. Discretion absolute. Compensation substantial. What it hadn't mentioned was that Kang Daniel, her new employer, commanded the largest Korean Mafia syndicate operating across 4 continents. At 24, Jasmine moved through the world with economy of motion, her natural hair pulled back in a practical bun that revealed the sharp intelligence in her dark eyes. She'd graduated summa cum laude in international relations, spent 2 years as a junior analyst with a private intelligence firm, and spoke English, Korean, Mandarin, Japanese, and Arabic with native fluency. None of that mattered now. Her family's debt to the San Francisco Triad had made those credentials irrelevant. $73,000. That's what her mother's medical emergency had cost when the insurance denied coverage. That's what the Triad's loan shark had advanced at 40% interest, compounding monthly. That's what had grown to $340,000 in 18 months, burying her family alive. The Triad owned her now. And they'd placed her here, in the house of their rival's rival, as a low-level intelligence asset. 3 years of service. 3 years of reporting back anything useful. Then freedom. Simple. Until it wasn't. This morning, Jasmine had been escorted through the estate staff entrance by the head of house, Mrs. Park, a severe woman in her 60s who'd explained the rules in rapid Korean, testing her. Jasmine had responded fluently, earning a flicker of surprise before Mrs. Park's professional mask returned. "You will serve the morning meeting," Mrs. Park had instructed, handing her the uniform. "You will be invisible. You will be silent. And you will never address the boss directly unless he speaks to you first." Now, 6 hours later, Jasmine stood in the grand hall where the afternoon light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting geometric shadows across imported Italian marble. The space was designed to intimidate, 20-foot ceilings, artwork that belonged in museums, and the kind of silence that only extreme wealth could purchase. She'd been arranging refreshments on the sideboard when Lauren Kong and the inner circle had entered. The boss's wife was beautiful in the way of someone who'd weaponized her appearance, designer dress that cost more than Jasmine's entire education, jewelry that whispered old money, and a smile that never reached her eyes. The 5 men surrounding her were enforcers, Jasmine had learned. Minho, the lead. Ji-hoon, the lieutenant. 3 others whose names she'd memorized from the organizational chart the triad had provided. They'd been laughing about something when Lauren noticed her. And everything had shifted. "Look at her," Lauren had said, and Jasmine's world had narrowed to survival. The scotch splashed. The phone filmed. The laughter built like a wave. Jasmine cleaned the floor with mechanical precision, her mind calculating angles, exits, threat assessments. This wasn't hazing. This was a test. She'd been in the house for 6 hours, and they were already probing for weakness. The cloth soaked up the amber liquid. Jasmine's hands didn't shake. Years of hostile boardrooms masquerading as intelligence briefings had taught her control. You didn't survive as a black woman in the intelligence community without learning to become stone when the world demanded you break. "Faster," Minho barked in Korean. "The boss expects perfection." Jasmine didn't flinch. She wrung out the cloth into a small basin she'd retrieved from her cart, methodical and thorough. The alcohol's sharp scent filled her nostrils, mixing with Lauren's expensive perfume and the men's cologne. "She doesn't even cry," Ji-hoon observed, almost disappointed. "Where's the fun in that?" "Give her time," Lauren said, her voice honeyed poison. "They always break eventually." The cloth made small circles on the marble. Jasmine's peripheral vision tracked every movement in the room, Lauren's phone still recording, Minho's hand resting on his belt near where she knew he kept a knife, the other men forming a loose perimeter. And Kong Daniel, still watching from the doorway, his expression carved from granite. She could feel his attention like a physical weight. This was his test, she realized. Not Lauren's game. The wife was a tool, the enforcers were instruments, but this whole performance had the boss's fingerprints all over it. He was measuring her. Jasmine finished cleaning, rose smoothly to her feet, and returned the cloth and basin to her cart. She met no one's eyes. Her voice, when she spoke, was level and professional. "My apologies for the disruption," she said in perfect Korean, the formal register appropriate for addressing superiors. "I'll ensure the floor is properly sanitized." The room went still. Speaking Korean hadn't been in the script. Neither had the flawless diction or the unshakable composure. Lauren's smile froze. Minho exchanged glances with Ji-hoon. The other men stopped laughing. And Kong Daniel pushed off from the doorframe, moving into the room with the fluid grace of a predator who'd just scented something interesting. "Your Korean is excellent," he said, his voice a low rumble that carried absolute authority. He spoke in English, forcing the conversation into neutral territory. "Where did you learn?" This was the moment. Answer wrong, and she'd confirmed their suspicions that she was more than she appeared, possibly a threat. Answer right, and she'd remain invisible, useful, controllable. Jasmine chose the truth, but only part of it. "University, Mr. Kong," she replied in English, keeping her tone deferential. "International relations degree. Languages were required. And yet you work as a maid." It wasn't a question. It was an excavation. "Circumstances change, sir." Kang's eyes narrowed. For 3 heartbeats, the only sound was the antique clock ticking on the mantel. Then his phone buzzed, a sharp, urgent tone that made every enforcer in the room straighten. The boss glanced at the screen, and something shifted in his expression. Not alarm. Calculation. "Sarangbang emergency," he announced in Korean, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Everyone to positions. Now." The men moved instantly, their earlier mockery replaced by military precision. Lauren's smile vanished as she stepped back, phone lowering. This was business, and even she knew when to exit the stage. Kang's eyes found Jasmine one last time, and there was something predatory in his gaze now, not sexual, but analytical. The look of a man who just realized the mouse in his house might actually be a snake. "You," he said, switching back to Korean. "Stay." And Jasmine understood, with crystalline clarity, that the real test was about to begin. The flight from San Francisco had been 13 hours of rehearsing her new identity. Jasmine Jackson, 24, domestic worker, 3-year contract, no family complications. She'd practiced the deferential head tilt in the airplane bathroom mirror, the softening of her posture, the careful erasure of everything that made her dangerous. The triad handler had been explicit during their final meeting in that dim sum restaurant in Chinaki. "You are invisible. You are grateful. You report every conversation, every visitor, every deviation in Kang's routine. 3 years, and your mother and brother go free. Deviate from this, and we start removing fingers." He'd smiled when he said it, like they were discussing the weather. Jasmine had nodded, her face blank, while her mind calculated the 18 different ways she could kill him with the chopsticks on the table. She'd done none of them. Her mother needed dialysis twice a week. Her brother was 16, still in high school, still believing their father's death in a car accident 5 years ago had been exactly that, an accident, not an execution for an unpaid gambling debt. The truth was a luxury neither of them could afford. Seoul's Incheon airport had been a blur of efficiency. A driver holding a placard with her name. A black sedan with tinted windows. 40 minutes of silence through roads that transformed from urban chaos to manicured suburban perfection. The Kang estate had appeared like a mirage, traditional Korean architecture amplified by obscene wealth, gardens that belonged in imperial palaces, walls that whispered security rather than screamed it. Mrs. Park had been waiting at the staff entrance, her face carved from disapproval. The orientation had been surgical, uniform specifications, prohibited areas marked in red on a laminated map, behavioral expectations delivered in rapid Korean that assumed incompetence. Jasmine had absorbed every word, her linguistic training making the formal register as natural as breathing. "You will be tested," Mrs. Park had warned, switching to English for emphasis. "Everyone is tested in this house. The ones who survive are the ones who remember their place." 6 hours later, standing in that ballroom with scotch pooling at her feet and Lauren Kang's laughter cutting through the chandelier light, Jasmine understood exactly what kind of test this was. The kind designed to break you before you even started. The kind that measured not your skill but your willingness to be ground down into something useful and silent. Minho's sneer. Ji-hoon's mockery. The phones filming her humiliation for an audience she'd never see. Lauren's voice turning her existence into a punchline about racial aesthetics and appropriate spaces for appropriate people. And through it all, Kang Daniel watching from the doorway like a scientist observing a specimen's response to stimuli. Jasmine bent, retrieved her cloth, and began to clean. Her hands moved in steady circles across imported marble. The alcohol's burn filled her sinuses. Somewhere behind her, one of the men made a comment in Korean about whether she'd cry or run first. She did neither. She simply cleaned, her mind cataloging faces, voices, hierarchies, and weaknesses, building the intelligence architecture that would either free her family or bury them all. The Sarangbang alert transformed the ballroom into a battlefield without a single shot fired. Kang's phone had barely stopped buzzing when the enforcers shifted from Lauren's entertainment committee into something else entirely. Men who killed for a living, now moving with the practiced efficiency of soldiers under fire. Minho barked orders into his earpiece. Ji-hoon pulled a tablet from his jacket, fingers flying across the screen. The 3 other enforcers formed a protective triangle around Kang, hands moving toward concealed weapons with muscle memory precision. Lauren retreated toward the corridor, her phone finally pocketed, reading the room correctly for once. Kang stood at the center of the chaos, perfectly still, his eyes scanning each enforcer in turn. Then he began speaking in Korean, his voice low and rapid, the words tumbling over each other like a linguistic stress test designed to separate competence from catastrophe. Minho, prep the armored limo for the Gangnam facility. Wait for the second confirmation call before departure. Pause. Half a breath. Ji-hoon, cancel the limo. The meeting's been moved to the safe house in Itaewon. Secure the satellite phone from the third-floor office. Another beat. No, leave the satellite phone. Get the encrypted tablet from the vault instead. Password is today's date reversed. The commands kept coming, each one contradicting the last, building a maze of impossible instructions that would paralyze anyone trying to follow them literally. Someone prep the helicopter. Actually, ground all aircraft. Notify the pilots they're on standby but do not, under any circumstances, file a flight plan. Get Ambassador Chin on the secure line. Wait, not Chin, get his deputy. No, scratch that entirely, get me the Russian contact through the Geneva router. Minho's hand froze halfway to his phone. Ji-hoon looked up from his tablet, confusion flickering across his face. The other enforcers exchanged glances, each waiting for someone else to move first, terrified of making the wrong choice. This wasn't procedure. This was performance art masquerading as crisis management. Jasmine's intelligence training kicked in with crystalline clarity. She'd seen this before, in training exercises designed to identify assets who could process information under chaos. The commands weren't meant to be followed sequentially. They were meant to be filtered, cross-referenced, decoded for the singular thread of actual intent buried beneath the noise. She moved before conscious thought caught up. 3 steps to the sideboard where house phones sat in a neat row. She lifted the black receiver, the secure internal line, and dialed the 4-digit extension for the third-floor administrative office. "This is Jackson," she said in Korean, her voice calm and clear. "Priority Sarangbang protocol. Retrieve the encrypted tablet from the executive vault. Authorization code 10-12-02-25. Deliver to the main hall immediately." She hung up. Turned. Found every eye in the room locked on her. Kang's expression hadn't changed, but something behind his eyes had sharpened into focus. The kind of focus that preceded either execution or promotion, with no middle ground between them. "Explain," he said, the single word carrying the weight of absolute authority. Jasmine kept her voice level, professional, stripped of anything that might be mistaken for pride. "You needed the tablet, sir. Today's date reversed is the password. December 10th becomes 10-12-02-25. Everything else was interference testing, personnel response time and critical thinking under pressure." Minho's face had gone pale. Ji-hoon's tablet hung forgotten in his hands. And Kang smiled, a small, dangerous expression that didn't reach his eyes but promised that everything in Jasmine's world had just fundamentally changed. The tablet arrived in 90 seconds, delivered by a breathless junior staffer who looked like he'd sprinted up 3 flights of stairs. Kang took it without acknowledgement, his fingers moving across the screen with the casual familiarity of someone who'd built an empire on encrypted communications and offshore accounts. The room held its collective breath. Then Kang looked up, his gaze cutting past Minho, past Ji-hoon, landing on someone Jasmine hadn't even registered as significant. A slight man in wire-rimmed glasses standing near the corridor entrance, a leather portfolio clutched against his chest like armor. "Mr. Song," Kang said, his voice conversational in the way that preceded violence. "How long have you been my executive assistant?" Song's face remained professionally neutral, but Jasmine caught the microsecond of tension in his shoulders, the slight tightening around his eyes. She'd seen that response before in interrogation footage. The moment when a target realizes the trap has already closed. 7 years, sir, Song replied in Korean, his voice steady. Since the expansion into the European markets. 7 years of loyalty. 7 years of access to every meeting, every document, every private conversation in this organization. Kang's fingers moved across the tablet again, and he turned the screen toward the room. 7 years of reporting everything to Kim Shin's network. The image on the screen was damning, a photograph of Song in a parking garage, handing a thumb drive to a man Jasmine didn't recognize but whose tattoos marked him as clearly as a business card. The timestamp read 3 days ago. Minho moved before Kang finished speaking, crossing the distance to Song in 4 strides. His hand locked around the assistant's wrist, twisting the portfolio free. It hit the marble floor, spilling papers and, crucially, a phone that was still recording, its red light blinking steadily. The Sarangbang alert was fabricated, Kang continued, pocketing his tablet. There is no emergency. There is only you, Mr. Song, and your desperate need to capture information about our response protocols for your true employers. He stepped closer, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Did you enjoy the performance? Song's composure cracked like fine porcelain under pressure. It's not, I can explain. Explanations are for people who matter. Kang's voice carried no heat, no anger, just the absolute certainty of someone announcing an already completed transaction. You stopped mattering the moment you forgot which side of this equation holds the power. Ji-hoon had the phone now, examining it with professional detachment. 47 minutes of continuous recording, he reported. Uploaded in real time to an external server. I can trace it. Do that. Kang turned away from Song like the man had already ceased to exist, his attention shifting to Jasmine with the kind of focus that made her previous analysis seem like casual observation. You. Jackson. How did you know? The question was a scalpel, designed to determine whether her competence was training or accident. Jasmine chose truth, measured and precise. The contradictory commands weren't chaos, sir. They were designed to create hesitation, to force your people into paralysis while someone, she glanced at Song, documented the confusion for analysis. Only one instruction mattered. The rest was theater. Kang studied her for a long moment, and Jasmine could feel him recalculating her value, adjusting her position in whatever complex equation governed his world. From this moment, he said finally, his words formal and binding, you clean nothing but my ledger. Minho's eyes widened. Ji-hoon looked like he'd been struck. Lauren, still hovering in the corridor, made a sound of protest that died when Kang's gaze flicked toward her. And Jasmine understood, with perfect clarity, that she'd just been promoted from pawn to player in a game whose rules she was only beginning to comprehend. Lauren's rage manifested in silence first, then in carefully orchestrated accidents. The security pass that mysteriously deactivated, trapping Jasmine outside the executive wing for 40 minutes. The lunch delivery that arrived with shellfish despite Jasmine's documented allergy noted in her personnel file. The staff meeting where Lauren introduced her as Daniel's new project, with a smile that could cut glass. Jasmine documented everything. Time stamps. Witnesses. The small pattern of sabotage that would be dismissed individually but formed a clear picture when compiled. She'd learned in intelligence work that amateurs made dramatic moves while professionals built cases brick by brick. Her new office occupied the 3rd floor's eastern corner, a space that had belonged to Song before his abrupt disappearance. Mrs. Park had overseen the transition with tight-lipped efficiency, providing Jasmine with new key cards, biometric access codes, and a warning delivered in rapid Korean. The boss protects his assets until they stop being useful. Remember which category you're in. The office itself was a study in controlled paranoia. Bulletproof windows overlooking the estate's gardens. A door that locked from the inside with reinforced steel. 3 monitors arranged across a custom desk, each connected to different secure networks. A safe built into the wall behind a painting of Jeju Island that required both palm print and retinal scan. Jasmine had been inside for 6 hours when she realized the full scope of what Kang had handed her. The financial network wasn't a business, it was an empire held together by digital duct tape and institutional momentum. Shell corporations nested inside holding companies, offshore accounts in 17 countries, cryptocurrency wallets scattered across exchanges that existed in legal gray zones. The legitimate businesses, real estate, shipping, tech manufacturing, generated maybe 40% of the revenue. The rest flowed through channels that would make international prosecutors salivate. But it was the pattern in the cash flows that made her stop scrolling, her analyst brain triggering alarms that her conscious mind was still processing. Someone was bleeding Kang's operation dry. Small amounts, never enough to trigger automated alerts, routed through subsidiaries that looked legitimate on paper but dissolved into vapor when traced to their endpoints. 5 million here. 8 million there. Over 18 months, someone had siphoned nearly $200 million from the syndicate's accounts, and they'd done it with the kind of sophistication that suggested internal access and institutional knowledge. Kim Shin. The name appeared in her research like a ghost haunting the margins: business rival, former partner, current existential threat. Every missing transaction eventually led back to companies with ties to his network. He wasn't just competing with Kong. He was systematically dismantling the K-Mafia's financial infrastructure from the inside. A knock at her door shattered her concentration. Jasmine minimized the screens reflexively, her hand moving toward the letter opener on her desk. Inadequate as a weapon but better than nothing. "It's Minho," came the voice through the reinforced door. "The boss wants your first report." 30 minutes. Conference room A. Jasmine checked her watch. She'd been granted access to the ledgers at 9 a.m. It was now 3:15 p.m. 6 hours to diagnose a terminal illness in an empire that employed thousands and controlled billions. She opened a new document and began typing, her fingers translating complex financial forensics into language that would make sense to a man who solved problems with violence and strategy in equal measure. Outside her window, Lauren stood in the garden, her phone pressed to her ear, her body language radiating fury. The silent war had begun. But Jasmine was starting to suspect it wasn't the war that would kill her. The underground meeting space existed in the kind of place that appeared on no maps and in no zoning records. 3 levels beneath a Gangnam nightclub, accessed through a kitchen freezer that doubled as an elevator. Jasmine followed Kong and Minho through the descent, her new role as strategist apparently including attendance at negotiations that could end in bloodshed with the wrong word or gesture. The room itself was deliberately neutral territory, all concrete and fluorescent lighting, with a single steel table and chairs bolted to the floor. Security from both sides lined the walls, Kang's enforcers on one side, Kim Shin's on the other, everyone armed and everyone pretending this was civilized discourse rather than ritualized threat assessment. Kim Shin arrived 10 minutes late, a calculated power play that Kong absorbed without visible reaction. He was younger than Jasmine expected, maybe 40, with the kind of tailored elegance that came from new money trying to purchase old respect. His suit was Brioni. His watch was Patek Philippe. His smile was a predator's assessment of prey. "Daniel," he said in Korean, not bothering with honorifics. "You've brought an interesting addition to your collection." Kang's expression remained neutral. "My strategist. Ms. Jackson." "Ah yes. The Black Shadow." Kim's English was pristine, educated abroad, weaponized for maximum impact. "I've heard the rumors." Kong, Daniel's new pet genius, pulled from the servant class to play at business. He settled into his chair, eyes never leaving Jasmine. "Tell me, Shadow, what strategic wisdom have you offered your master today?" The dismissal was tactical, make her react emotionally, undermine her credibility, force Kong to defend his judgment in choosing her. Jasmine had seen this play in boardrooms and briefing rooms across 2 continents. She met Kim's gaze and spoke in Korean, formal register, her tone clinical. "Your Busan port operation has a structural vulnerability in its customs clearance process. Inspector Park Jin-woo, badge number 3347, has been accepting payments from 3 different organizations simultaneously. When the National Intelligence Service moves on him, and they will, he's been flagged for 6 months, your entire southern shipping corridor collapses. You'll lose approximately 60 million in detained cargo and another 120 million in contracts you can't fulfill." The room went silent. Kim's smile froze. One of his enforcers shifted weight, hand moving toward his jacket. Minho tensed, ready to respond. Kong, to his credit, revealed nothing, no surprise, no satisfaction, just the same analytical focus he'd maintained since they'd entered. "Bold accusation," Kim said finally, his voice tight. "From someone who's been in this world for what, a week?" 9 days, Jasmine corrected. "And it's not an accusation. It's analysis based on customs processing time variances, electronic payment patterns through 3 shell accounts, and cross-referencing NIS investigation timelines available through public financial disclosure reports. Inspector Park is compromised. Your operation is exposed. You're here trying to absorb Kang's network because yours is about to implode. Kim stood abruptly, his chair scraping against concrete. This meeting is over. Sit down, Kang said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made disobedience unthinkable. She's not finished. Jasmine pulled a folded paper from her jacket, printed analysis, no electronics allowed in neutral territory, and slid it across the table. The solution is actually simple. Rear out through Incheon using legitimate manifest protocols, sacrifice Inspector Park before he can negotiate testimony, and absorb the short-term loss. You'll survive. Barely. Kim stared at the paper like it might explode. Then he looked at Kang, really looked at him, and something shifted in his expression, the realization that the balance of power in this room had just fundamentally changed. Where, Kim asked quietly, did you find her? Kang smiled. She found me. The intercepted communication arrived at 2:17 a.m., routed through Kang's intelligence network from a source Jasmine wasn't cleared to know about. She'd been asleep in her new quarters, a suite on the estate's second floor that came with its own security detail and the kind of insomnia that accompanied sudden proximity to extreme violence. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Kang, third floor. Now. She found him in the war room, a space she hadn't known existed until Minho escorted her through a biometric scanner disguised as a supply closet. The room was pure functionality, digital displays covering 3 walls, secure communication terminals, and a conference table covered in tablets and printed intelligence reports. Kang handed her a phone without preamble. On the screen, a photograph of handwritten notes in Korean, the penmanship hurried, the content devastating. Kim's lieutenant, Kang explained. Photographed these during a planning meeting yesterday. Our source risked execution to get them out. Jasmine scanned the notes, her linguistic training parsing the shorthand and coded references. Dates. Locations. Asset designations that meant nothing until her analyst brain started connecting them to the financial networks she'd been dissecting. Then she saw it. Mokpo Shipyard, she said, looking up. He's moving on it Friday. 3 days from now. The Mokpo facility was one of South Korea's largest private shipyards, currently in bankruptcy proceedings, its ownership tied up in legal disputes that had dragged on for 18 months. On paper, it was worthless, outdated equipment, massive debt, union problems. In reality, it was a gateway to legitimizing illegal cargo operations across East Asia, worth hundreds of millions to whoever could navigate the acquisition. We've had lawyers working the bankruptcy court for a year, Minho said from his position by the displays. The judge won't rule for another 6 months minimum. Jasmine shook her head, still reading. Kim's not going through legal channels. He's bribing the primary creditor, Daehan Industrial Bank. 40 million cash, offshore account, in exchange for transferring the debt to a shell company he controls. Once he owns the debt, he can force an emergency liquidation sale and buy the shipyard for cents on the dollar. The whole thing happens before the court even knows the creditor changed. Kang's expression darkened. When? The money transfers Friday morning. Contract signed by Friday evening. He'll own it by Monday. Can we intercept the payment? No. But we can outbid him. Jasmine pulled up a calculator on one of the tablets, her fingers flying across the screen. Daehan Industrial is a bank. They don't care who pays them, they care about maximizing recovery on a bad loan. We offer 50 million, same terms, tomorrow morning. They'll take our money over Kim's because it's more and it's immediate. 50 million liquid by tomorrow morning, Minho said slowly. That's aggressive. So is losing the shipyard to Kim and watching him control every smuggling route from Busan to Shanghai. Jasmine met Kang's eyes. He's not trying to compete with you anymore. He's trying to replace you. The shipyard is the first domino. If he gets it, he'll have the infrastructure to undercut your shipping rates, strangle your supply lines, and force your legitimate businesses into insolvency. You'll be fighting a war on two fronts, legal and illegal, and he'll bleed you dry in both. The room fell silent except for the hum of electronics and ventilation. Kang studied her for a long moment, then turned to Minho. Call Geneva. Liquidate the pharmaceutical holdings. I want 50 million in Dehan's accounts by 8 a.m. Back to Jasmine, you're coming to the bank with me. If this works, you negotiate the terms. If it fails. It won't fail, Jasmine interrupted, her voice carrying a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Kim made one mistake. He assumed you wouldn't know about it until it was done. Kang smiled, and it was the most dangerous expression Jasmine had ever seen. He assumed wrong. The message arrived through encrypted channels Jasmine hadn't used in 3 weeks, a violation of protocol that meant either desperation or escalation. She opened it alone in her office at 4 a.m., the estate silent except for security patrols and her own accelerating heartbeat. The attached photo showed her mother outside the dialysis clinic in San Francisco, her brother walking beside her, both unaware they were being photographed. The message was brief, written in Mandarin, * your new position is interesting. Mr. Kang would find your original employment terms even more interesting. We require a status report and 50,000 USD by Monday, or we share everything *. Jasmine's hands didn't shake as she deleted the message, scrubbed the device's memory, and sat in darkness calculating survival probabilities. The Triad had placed her here as a low-level intelligence asset, expecting reports on Kang's movements, his associates, his vulnerabilities. Instead, she'd become his strategist, his confidant, someone with access to information that could destroy entire networks. They wanted to leverage that access. Or they wanted to burn her before she became too powerful to control. Either way, her family was the leverage, and Monday was 72 hours away. She couldn't pay them. 50,000 might as well be 50 million. Her accounts were monitored now, every transaction flagged by Kang's financial security systems. She couldn't run. Her mother's dialysis schedule was non-negotiable, and her brother's school had security protocols that made extraction impossible without resources she didn't have. Which left one option: remove the threat using Kang's resources without revealing why she needed them removed. Jasmine spent the next 16 hours building a narrative. The Triad San Francisco operation appeared in Kang's intelligence files as a minor rival, not significant enough to warrant action, but documented enough to be credible. She began pulling threads, finding connections that actually existed, weaving them into a story that would make sense to someone who didn't know her personal stake. The Triad had ties to Kim Shin's supply network. True. They'd recently expanded their West Coast loan operations. True. They were actively recruiting intelligence assets to infiltrate Korean criminal organizations. Also true, and Jasmine was living proof. She just needed to make Kang believe they were targeting him specifically, that their operation represented an immediate threat requiring immediate neutralization. By Thursday evening, she had a presentation ready, 40 slides of financial connections, communication intercepts, and strategic analysis showing how the San Francisco Triad was positioning itself to support Kim Shin's eventual move against Kang's North American operations. The evidence was real. The interpretation was survival. She requested a meeting. Kang granted it within an hour. The Triad, she began, her voice steady despite everything at stake, is building a parallel intelligence network in California. They're recruiting analysts, gathering information on our shipping routes, our distribution channels, our financial structures. In 6 months, they'll hand everything to Kim Shin, and he'll use it to dismantle your West Coast operations completely. Kang studied the slides, his expression unreadable. Recommendation? Aggressive disruption. Target their leadership, freeze their operational accounts, and eliminate their recruitment pipeline. Make it costly enough that they abandon the project entirely. Jasmine advanced to the next slide, photos of Triad operatives she'd pulled from intelligence databases, none of whom knew her family existed. I've identified the key players. Minho's team could execute within 72 hours. You're asking me to start a war with a Triad family based on intelligence gathering that hasn't produced actionable damage yet. I'm asking you to prevent a war by removing the threat before it materializes. Jasmine met his eyes, praying he couldn't see the desperation behind her professional facade. Kim Shin is the visible enemy. But the Triad is building the weapon he'll use to kill you. Stop them now, or fight them later when they're embedded in your operations and impossible to extract. Kang was silent for 30 seconds that felt like hours. Then, make the target list. Minho leaves for San Francisco tomorrow night. The exchange was supposed to happen at the Mokpo shipyard, neutral ground under the supervision of a Hong Kong arbitrator who specialized in exactly these kinds of territorial transfers. 50 million in verified cryptocurrency for the controlling interest in the facility, Kim Shin in attendance to witness Kang's acquisition of the asset he tried to steal. Jasmine had argued against Kang attending personally. Too exposed. Too predictable. But the boss had insisted, this wasn't just business, it was theater, and Kim needed to watch his ambition die in real time. They arrived at sunset, 3 black SUVs carrying Kang, Jasmine, Minho, and 8 enforcers trained in close protection and rapid response. The shipyard stretched across 40 acres of concrete and rusting cranes, its main office building converted into a temporary negotiation space complete with security scanners and armed guards from both sides. Jasmine felt wrong the moment they entered. The guards' positions were slightly off, angled for crossfire rather than protection. The arbitrator's assistant kept checking his phone with the nervous energy of someone waiting for a signal. Kim Shin sat at the conference table with a smile that belonged on a man who'd already won. She leaned close to Kang, her voice barely a whisper. This is a kill box. We need to leave now. He started to respond, but the first shot answered for him. The window behind Kang exploded inward, the sniper's bullet missing his head by inches only because Jasmine had already grabbed his shoulder, yanking him sideways with the full force of her body weight. They hit the floor together as automatic weapons fire erupted from 3 directions, Kim's guards dropping their pretense, the arbitrator's assistant pulling a pistol from his briefcase, chaos transforming order into survival mathematics. Minho's team responded instantly, returning fire, creating a defensive perimeter around Kang while Jasmine processed vectors and trajectories with the cold clarity of her intelligence training. The sniper was positioned in the crane structure, 200 meters northeast, elevated position dominating the kill zone. She grabbed a pistol from Minho's backup holster without asking permission, sprinting toward the exit while bullets chewed concrete where she'd been standing. Outside, the crane ladder offered 30 meters of exposure and certain death if the sniper saw her coming. Jasmine climbed anyway, each rung bringing her closer to either salvation or execution. At the top, she found him, professional, disciplined, already repositioning for his second shot at Kang through the window. She fired twice, center mass, watched him fall. Below, the gunfight had evolved into something more personal. Kim Shin had abandoned cover, pulling a blade, screaming orders in Korean while his men pressed forward. He wanted Kang dead personally, wanted the satisfaction of finishing this himself. Jasmine descended the ladder with controlled speed, hitting the ground just as Kim's blade found Minho's shoulder, dropping the enforcer. The guards were down or scattered. The arbitrator was dead or hiding. And Kim was advancing on Kang with the kind of fury that came from humiliation compounded by desperation. She intercepted him 6 feet from the boss, no weapon except the training she'd maintained through 2 years of desk work and 9 days of pretending to be harmless. Kim's knife came high, aiming for her throat. Jasmine deflected, redirected, used his momentum against him. They crashed into a stack of shipping containers, metal echoing like thunder. His blade found her arm, shallow but burning. Her elbow found his nose, cartilage crunching. "You're the Maid," Kim gasped, blood streaming from his face, rage and confusion warring in his expression. "I was never the Maid," Jasmine replied, and drove her knee into his solar plexus hard enough to rupture something internal. He went down. Tried to rise. Jasmine's foot caught his wrist, pinning the knife hand. Her other foot crushed his windpipe with calculated pressure, not enough to kill instantly, but enough to make the next 3 minutes excruciating. Sirens were approaching, someone had called authorities, which meant this was about to become international news. Kim Shin dying at a business dispute, killed by Kang Daniel's female strategist in self-defense. The story would write itself. Kang appeared beside her, Minho clutching his bleeding shoulder behind him. The boss looked at Kim's dying form, then at Jasmine, and something in his expression was almost admiration. From this moment, he said quietly, you clean nothing at all. The envelope arrived 3 days after Kim Shin's death made international headlines, delivered to Jasmine's office by Kang himself, a gesture significant enough that Minho and the other enforcers noticed, whispered, recalibrated their understanding of hierarchy. Inside, discharge papers for her mother's medical debt, annotated with paid in full in red ink. Her brother's school records, showing a trust fund established for his entire education through graduate school. Property deeds for a house in San Francisco's Richmond district, title in her mother's name. And a letter of recommendation from a fictional employer, detailed enough to reconstruct an entire alternate career history that erased the past 9 weeks from existence. Your family is free, Kang said, standing by her window overlooking the estate gardens where Lauren no longer walked, having been relocated to a subsidiary property in Jeju after one sabotage attempt too many. You're free. There's a passport and travel documents in my safe. Korean Air has a first-class seat reserved for tomorrow's flight to San Francisco. After that, you disappear. I never knew you. You never knew me. Jasmine studied the documents, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what they represented. 3 years of servitude, gone. Her family's debt, erased. Her own life, returned like a gift she'd never expected to receive. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the weight of a choice that would define everything that came after. What happens to the organization without Kim Shin? She asked, not looking up. We consolidate. Absorb his territories. Eliminate the remaining rivals before they can organize a response. Kang moved to stand beside her, both of them reflected in the window's glass, a Korean crime lord and a black woman who'd killed to keep him alive. Standard expansion. Nothing you need to concern yourself with. And the financial vulnerabilities I identified? The bleeding accounts, the corrupt inspectors, the legal exposure in 6 different jurisdictions? I'll manage. You'll fail. Jasmine finally met his eyes in the reflection. Your network is brilliant but unstable. Kim Shin was a symptom, not the disease. Without structural reform, someone else will rise, exploit the same weaknesses, and you'll be fighting the same war in 6 months. Except next time, you might not have someone who can decode the threat before it kills you. Kang's expression remained neutral, but she'd learned to read the micro-expressions, the slight tightening around his eyes that meant she'd said something he'd already considered and dismissed. What are you proposing? I stay. Not as your strategist. As your partner. Equal authority, equal risk, equal decision-making power. Jasmine turned to face him directly. I can steer this enterprise into legitimate territory, clean the money, restructure the operations, build something that doesn't require constant warfare to maintain. Or, if you refuse, I can take what I know about your network and destroy it from the inside before I leave. The threat hung in the air between them, naked and undeniable. Kang smiled, not the predatory expression she'd seen in the ballroom, but something almost respectful. That's extortion. That's negotiation. You taught me that. Jasmine gestured at the documents on her desk. You're offering me freedom, and I appreciate it. But freedom without purpose is just another kind of prison. I spent 2 years analyzing problems I couldn't solve, watching injustice I couldn't prevent, constrained by regulations and bureaucracy and people who cared more about politics than results. And now you want to reform a criminal empire. I want to build something that matters. Your network touches thousands of lives, the legitimate businesses, the communities that depend on them, even the illegal operations that serve people the system has abandoned. It's broken, but it's fixable. And I'm the only person in this organization with both the skills to fix it and no loyalty to the old ways. Kang was silent for a long moment, and Jasmine could see him calculating angles, assessing risks, weighing her value against the threat she represented. Finally, co-strategist. Not partner. You'll have authority over financial operations and strategic planning. But operational decisions, enforcement, territorial disputes, security, remain mine. Agreed. With one condition. Jasmine picked up the property deed for her mother's house. My family stays protected. Permanently. If anything happens to them because of my association with you, I will personally ensure your empire burns. Agreed. Kong extended his hand, Western style, a gesture of equals rather than subordinates. Jasmine shook it, feeling the weight of everything she'd just committed to, the moral compromise, the danger, the power. She'd come to this estate as a maid, a pawn in someone else's game. She was leaving as something else entirely. The triad would hear about Minho's San Francisco operation, would understand that their leverage had been eliminated along with their leadership. Her family was safe. Her position was secure. And the woman who'd once cleaned floors now sat at the table where empires were built and destroyed. Lauren had called her a stain on the room's aesthetic. She'd been wrong. Jasmine wasn't a stain. She was the new foundation, and everything that came after would be built on her terms. Thanks for watching. If this story entertained you, show some love by liking the video, commenting your thoughts on the story, and subscribing to the channel for more. I've chosen 2 special stories on your screen. Go ahead and dive in. Have a wonderful day.